Right now, I want to jump out to our Village Inn hotline where all of our guests always appear. And with us right now, we've got a pair of individuals who are part of a great new book that was just released last week for the first time. The book is titled Living Out Loud, Sports, Cancer, and the Things Worth Fighting For. Craig Sager, along with son Craig Sager II and Brian Curtis, all part of this great project. And Craig Jr. and Brian are with us right now on our Village Inn hotline. Gentlemen, welcome to the show here in El Paso, and thank you both so much for being here.
How about them Cowboys?
Now, who is that? Was that Craig?
Yes.
Yeah, Craig, trust me. I spent the whole first hour talking around about the Dallas Cowboys here. So, yes,
all right.
This is big-time Cowboys country. There are a lot of Cowboys fans over here. And I know since you work with the Journal-Constitution in Atlanta and the Falcons, I'm sure the Falcons are still stinging a little bit from that game yesterday to the Eagles.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah, I know it. Now, first off, give me an update on your dad. I know he's been out of the hospital for about the last 3 weeks or so. How's he doing?
Yeah, he's had a rough last couple months. He had that third transplant pretty much right after the ESPYs in July, and just the recovery process from that is so tough, especially because he had to go straight into it with all the chemo to kind of wipe out his immune system to be able to basically be at zero leukemia for the transplant. So he has definitely been through quite the recovery process, but he is hopefully turning that corner, and a couple of weeks from being able to get out of Houston, maybe get on a golf course in a couple months.
I've never seen anything like your dad. I watched that Real Sports story. I've read the articles. It was covered in Sports Illustrated, and I'm sure with everything that he's gone through, you tell me, Craig, was writing a book something he had ever discussed with you before?
Not at all. And that's what was so interesting about the opportunity when it was presented to us was I knew how unique the book would end up being just based off, how unique my dad is and his perspective and just who he is. And that's what's so amazing about this whole thing. There are so many ways I could talk about why this book is different, but I think that is the main thing is we got this opportunity at the worst time. We just found out he had leukemia for a third time and didn't have a clue what was going to happen. We didn't know about the ESPYs yet. We didn't know about him getting to cover Game 6. We didn't know any of that incredible, inspirational stuff was going to happen. But as we write this story, all that is part of the story. We were living it. This isn't a book where we went back and reflected on things. Yeah, we talked about what he's been through before it, but really the story and his battle took a life of its own right at the time we got this opportunity, and it was fascinating to be a part of. It really was.
I started this book over the weekend, so I'm about a quarter into it, I would say, right now. And, in the beginning of the book, when I got to, learn about your dad growing up, what he was like as a kid, what his parents were like, and then how he segues really into the family and his children, yourself included, what it's about, it is a different book. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he segues to you, and you start narrating a chapter. And I'm thinking to myself, I've never really read books like this before, so you're right. It's the one thing I'm getting out of this right now, and I haven't even gotten to the part yet really where he's talking about being sick and the support group, but you could just tell this is a very personal story from your dad, from yourself, and everybody involved.
And that's exactly what I wanted it to be, because I could have sat there and tried to provide some self-help type writing style where I look back at what it was like when I first found out he got sick and then what I learned from that. But that doesn't really help anyone. Our situation is obviously different than a lot of people, just based off his job, based off the city we live in. everyone affected by this is affected in different ways. So I set out from the beginning, I said, I'm going to try to write exactly how I was thinking and at that moment, even though when I first found out, I'm obviously a much different person now, but I just tried to go there in my head and really just talk about the things that were running through my head when you find out something like this. And then knowing that, I mean, just when the news is the worst and worst, and just where you find hope, and how do you have confidence in someone to make the right decision? How do you not take no for an answer, but also know how to search for the right answer? And we tried to be as honest as possible, hoping that someone can learn from us, but also apply it to their situation.
Craig Sager, the second, with us right now on our Village Inn hotline, along with co-author Brian Curtis. The name of the book, Living Out Loud, Sports, Cancer, and the Things Worth Fighting For. Now, Brian, you're a New York Times bestselling author. You've been part of 6 books before, including some big ones. The book on Pearl Harbor, Fields of Battle, a book on the Rose Bowl, and also a book with Jerry Rice, My Journey Beyond the Game and the Fame. Tell me about your involvement and how you got, to talking to both Craig Sr. and Craig II about the project Living Out Loud.
Well, obviously, as a former sports broadcaster, I knew about Craig, but I really hadn't done a book for 2 or 3 years. I had done a book 5 years ago with the families of September 11th, and I was kind of waiting for a book to kind of pop out at me. I was able to do this Pearl Harbor book, Fields of Battle, and while I was finishing that up, I happened to watch the HBO Real Sports segment that you mentioned earlier on Craig, and I was sitting in my home in Atlanta and just said, there's something there. This is more than just the general athlete fights cancer story. And so the more I researched Craig and learned about the story and how his son, Junior, had given him the bone marrow, I was entranced. And so I had actually reached out to Junior first. And Junior and I spoke about it, and I found out that Junior's writing background and thought we could partner up. So the hardest one was going to be Craig. And so Junior went from his side, and I went from my side. And I think, Craig and I were talking last week. I think at the beginning he was very reluctant. He doesn't like to relive some of the bad things that he's had to battle through. But I think as he went through it and wrote about Batavia and how he grew up, and certainly his family and Craig included, I think he now looks back and he's really glad he did it as kind of the battle. And, Craig Jr.'s ability to write, like he said, and transform his feelings in a unique style that Senior and I didn't do, which kind of separates apart, I think is what really makes this book special, is the way Craig Jr. kind of comes out with his fantastic writing, which comes from his journalism background. And it's been an honor to get to know the family, to get to be close to Craig and his wife Stacy and all 5 of the kids.
I was going to say this too, Brian, for you. I'm sure the deeper you got into this project, and as you started to work with both Craig Sr. and Craig Jr., you realize that, this is really an unbelievable story, and it's a story worth telling, and it's just such a unique tale.
It is, and you also learn how crazy the family is, but that's a good thing. All families are crazy. But, being able to go out to the ESPYs with the family and just go to games with Craig Sr. and walking around and just seeing people of all ages and race, even some that aren't basketball fans, they know Craig as that guy. And folks just come up to him and they want their picture taken with them and they want to be a part of it. Because so many of them have been touched by cancer or some other kind of disease. And I think they see that as an inspiration. Is one thing that we wrote about in the book is there was a time when I was down at MD Anderson with Craig, and a woman came up to him and started to pray with him, or asked to pray with him in the waiting room before a chemo appointment, and said that she had just brought her husband up because if MD Anderson was where Craig Sager was getting treatment, then she knew that's the place where she had to take her husband.
Wow.
And there's just millions of those kind of stories.
Good stuff. Brian Curtis with us, along with Craig Sager II, Living Out Loud, Sports, Cancer, and the things worth fighting for. We're talking about the new book right now with both co-authors here on the show as we continue. A question on Twitter for you, Craig Jr. Here we go from Oscar Lloyd Jr. He wants to know if you would want anyone who didn't know your father to know one thing about his legacy, what would that be?
Oh, man. I think the best thing about his legacy, I think it really defines it in a simple way, is his motto, which is rules are for people without brains. And it never really made sense to me, but throughout this process, I mean, you realize he really does grab life by the horns. He doesn't wait for anything to tell him what to do. It's more of just an instinct. Being the guy that runs out on the field to interview Hank Aaron, just never being afraid to stick his microphone out there and stick himself in situations that a lot of us would be hesitant to do. He just has an understanding of what's important, what's exciting, and he looks for the fun in every situation. And I think that's just something that is so unique about him, and you can see it when you're watching a game. Sports are a very competitive atmosphere. Lots of pressure on the athletes, lots of pressure on the coaches. He covers the biggest games, but no matter what game he goes to, he shows up to the arena the same every time. Everyone else is trying to compete and be the best version of themselves. He is just being himself. And I think it's why he's so likable, and I think it's why it has been so incredible to see him battle through this and use his personality to make the most out of it.
In the book, he talks about how failure is not really an option. And one of the things he always mentioned in life was the reason he has such a great positive outlook is he doesn't see it any other way. So whether that was trying kind of a ridiculous stunt, which he mentioned earlier in his life that he did, or even fighting cancer like he has with the 3 bouts of leukemia, he just said failure is not an option. And I'm wondering, you were there. And with the bone marrow transplants, which you gave to your father to help him reboot his immune system, I'm sure you probably take the same exact motto. We always talk about hashtag Sager Strong because that's become so synonymous with his fight. But I'm assuming that a lot of what he's all about and believes has now become not only part of you, but the entire family.
Yeah, most of my life I thought that everyone had two sides of them. I thought they had a working side and then like a fun side or a relaxing side. And I always waited for it. I always waited for it to come out with him. And then once he went through this battle, I realized, no, he's just himself all the time. And it really, I've never met anyone like that. I really haven't. And I think the best example I have is when I went to Houston for that second transplant, and the odds couldn't have been worse. We needed an absolute miracle. I went through the week-long process to give him a second bone marrow donation. I found out that not only is the miracle we needed for it to actually work not possible, but they didn't even know how they would even be able to get him to the stage where he could receive the transplant. So I basically left knowing he has like 2, maybe 3 weeks to live if they don't find an answer. But you're exactly right. I got on that plane knowing it was bad, but still having hope that he would look for an answer. And it was just the fact that I knew he would keep looking that gave me the peace of mind I needed, and he found his answer. So I think that's just what is so consistent with him, but also does rub off on me and basically give me not the same positive attitude, but it does go a long way.
First off, a lot of things rubbed off on you, including filling in for him as a court reporter for the NBA on TNT with Greg Popovich. And I know there's a picture of you two in the book. I've seen the interview itself, which I thought was great, but I can't even imagine what the nerves must have been like running through you, trying to fill in your father's shoes, doing some sideline reporting for an NBA game.
It was unbelievable. I mean, that was 4 days after I found out that he had the diagnosis. And you go in there, you're supposed to do a sit-down interview. You don't really know how it's going to go. You're nervous about that the whole time. Then you go into Greg Popovich's office. He gives you a note to give to your dad. He tells you about his admiration. You realize just what an incredible person Greg Popovich is. And then he tells you that he wants to do it live at the end of the third quarter. So I'd been in meetings with Turner. I had talked about this interview for a day at that point, and no one had ever mentioned that I would be doing it in the third quarter. And that's what was so amazing, was the fact that it was Popovich's idea, and he knew that it would mean a lot to my dad, and just being able to do it, I think it really did make a difference, because it made the whole family just appreciate it. And instead of him missing the playoffs and that just being a sad period of time, it carried over. And then he got to cover the playoffs the next year. And so that moment, I mean, it made all the difference in the world. It really did.
I'll ask you guys this question before we wrap things up, and then, we can go from there. The book again, Living Out Loud, Sports Cancer, and the Things Worth Fighting For, by Craig Sager, with Craig Sager II and Brian Curtis, and they are both joining us right now on our Village Inn hotline here as we continue on Sports Talk. Did you both have any idea, really, when the story started to get more publicity and gain traction? I mean, how many individuals in the sports world cared about Craig Sr., loved that man, and then hearing the stories, like, what Charles Barkley had to say, that when he went to visit him in the hospital, he felt he almost, it was where he was trying to pick up Craig, and then when he leaves, he feels like your dad picked him up. And that was just the attitude that he has and the way he looks at life. Did you guys have any idea the response around the entire, sports world and really go so far as to say pop culture with Craig Sr.?
I'll let Brian answer that first.
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, obviously the HBO Sports stories, and then when the Sports Illustrated story came out in May, I think Craig Jr. would agree that kind of elevated thing to a whole other level. And then even the ESPY Awards, when you have millions of people see him give such a powerful and passionate speech about never giving up, I think that inspired even more people. When you go to Craig Sr.'s home in Canton, north of Atlanta, still today he gets a ton of mail from all over the world, from strangers, from people that want him to sign the cover of SI, to people to tell them they lost their dad to cancer. And then, as I said, he's received text and emails, and, he was at an event on Thursday night at MD Anderson seated with President George Bush, the senior, and Vice President Joe Biden, and to sit there and talk about the cancer moonshot with Vice President Biden. And, it's a whole nother circle, I think, that Craig's been elevated in, but I think there's a reason for it. I think there's a purpose. And, the doctors keep telling him this may be it, and Craig keeps saying, nope, not going to be it. And I think it's certainly impacted my life and changed my life and how I approach challenges.
Great answer, Brian. What about you, Craig Jr.?
Yeah, I definitely knew that the support was there, but I mean, my mindset through the entire process has been a little bit about what Brian just said. I look back to the Keith Olbermann piece when my dad first got sick, when he said leukemia picked the wrong opponent. And I've always sort of believed that. My dad has always been a guy that didn't really sleep much. He was always on the go and always had an incredible stamina to him as it is. Then you combine his mental toughness and his positivity, and it's like he is just a fighting machine. And so my confidence in him definitely came from knowing how much support he had and what an impact he could make, but also knowing that it was going to be his attitude that would elevate it to a whole new level. I mean, I really did believe in his ability to not take no for an answer. And I mean, I'm so proud of the way he's fought through, and also the way Stacey's been there for him every step of the way.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if you want to learn more about it. The book, Living Out Loud, Sports Cancer, The Things Worth Fighting For. Craig, Brian, you guys have been great. Can't thank you enough for the time. And all I can tell you is the book's a must-have, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to sit down over the next few days and continuing this great read. So thank you both for being on with us. And, again, great job guys, on the project.
Thank you. Don't drink too much tequila. I heard that offer.
I'll try not to. I will try not to. All right. Take care, Craig.